So let's talk about the GT Fury. I've gotten one ride on this bike so far, and I have pretty much loved it. But I wanted to go over first impressions on the bike and also talk about whether or not you should be buying bikes from GT, from Rocky Mountain, and God forbid, any other companies that are going to be going under or stopping production or anything like that. I've seen a lot of questions online on whether or not it's still worth it to be buying bikes from companies like GT. So I wanted to touch on that real quick. But we're going to start off with first impressions of the bike. I live in Colorado, up in the mountains. My house is at about 10,000 feet elevation. And it is currently, March, almost the end of March, or March 20th right now. So it is cold, it is snowy, and I'm not doing much biking up here. But with that said, I got the opportunity to take this guy down to Bootleg Canyon, which is just outside of Vegas. And I raced the last of the Bootleg Canyon Downhill Series races. That was my first time ever riding the bike. I mean, I stood on it a couple times, but that was the first time it's seen dirt. That was the first time I had any experience on it that wasn't in my tiny little studio apartment upstairs here. So let's get into the good, the bad, and the, whatever about the GT Fury and kind of what I noticed on those 4-ish days that I was riding it out in the desert in Nevada. So starting off with the good. This bike handles extremely well. So I've kept the bike in the progressive setting on the shock mount, and that thing felt amazing. I'm running a stiffer spring than I should be on that thing, but it felt so good just blasting through all of the crazy gnarly rock chunks. I'll throw some footage in of the practice. I think that was the first or second day I was there. I didn't get any race run footage, unfortunately. I should have, but this thing has performed really well. So with that said, let's talk about the other plus of the bike. You have a lot of control over adjustments. We're seeing this more and more in the industry, and it is honestly, I think, fantastic. It's very easy to switch between the progressive shock mount and the linear shock mount. It's very easy to lengthen and shorten the chainstay by 10 millimeters on the back. It's just a little flip chip. I've kept it in the short setting right now. This bike is a little bit big for me with the stack and the reach. It feels good, but I'm coming from an older downhill bike, so I'm used to that really short, kind of flicky, very maneuverable bike. So I kept it in the short setting, and I was really happy with it, especially at a place like the Bootleg Canyon race where it's not a lot of very fast technical stuff. It's really just the slower tech that gets you out there. And the short length on that was fantastic. This is a size medium, and I'm 5'8", and honestly, I was worried about it feeling a little too big, especially having ridden the Commencal Supreme medium, the Scott medium, all those bikes. They felt a little bit too big, but this bike feels really good. And it's nice to know that I can flip that flip chip in the back and go to the longer chainstay if I ever want to. So overall, the bike feels really good. I haven't gotten a lot of experience on it, but like I said, on those first few days, this thing really impressed me. It's easy to maneuver. It eats up the chunk. It is pretty intuitive, which not a lot of bikes are. If you're coming from an older bike, or if you're coming from your trail bike, whatever, and you're jumping on a downhill bike, it might seem like it's so big, it's hard to turn, it's hard to get in the middle of. You feel like you're on top of the bike sometimes, or you feel like you're too low. This bike felt really intuitive. So another positive for the GT Fury is that it has a 12x148 axle in the rear and a 20x110 in the front. I have Hope Pro 5 hubs on this thing, so it's really easy to transition from the 15x110 to 20x110. It's a small little conversion kit, super easy to use. And the nice thing about that is that I can actually switch wheel sets with my trail bike. And that's pretty nice. I mean, it's easier to find wheels, especially if you're in an area where you don't have a lot of downhill parts. You're going to be able to find stuff that'll fit the GT Fury. Another nice thing about this thing is that it's priced incredibly right now. And that's one of the things I'll talk about when we're talking about whether it's worth it to buy this thing or not. But I picked this thing up for $2,400. I've pretty much replaced almost everything on the bike, and so far I'm still way ahead of what it would have cost me to buy a similar spec bike from any manufacturer, even on sale. So I think I'm at about $4,500, maybe a little more, and I've got new brakes on it, new wheels on it. I've changed out the drivetrain. I've changed out the shock. I've got new grips and a new saddle coming in just for, aesthetic purposes, because you don't really use the saddle too much on a downhill bike. Maybe I'll be doing some suies. I'll be gripping that seat a little bit, so I need a little something. I don't know, just trying to justify it to myself. But honestly, the pricing in these things is crazy. I mean, Jensen, everyone has their thoughts on Jensen. I have my thoughts on Jensen. Jensen had this bike in the Pro build for $2,800 to $3,000, which is insane. I mean, it came with the Boxer Ultimate on it, the RockShox Super Deluxe Ultimate on it. The wheel set was pretty solid, the SRAM GX DH drivetrain. And at that point, it's kind of a no-brainer. And we'll talk about that when we get into why it may or may not be worth it to buy one of these bikes. Keeping on with the good on the bike, it's perfectly rideable in its stock form, straight out of the box. So, if you're like a beginner mountain biker, the stock configuration will serve you pretty well for a while until you need to upgrade. Now, talking about upgrading, we can get into the bad, which ironically enough is going to be that stock configuration of the bike. So the Fury Carbon Elite, which is this model, comes with some questionable rims. They are light trail rims at best. So if you're going to be riding the bike hard, I don't think those things will last very long. So I've gone ahead and I've swapped the wheels on this thing. I've got the FR 541s from DT Swiss laced on the Hope Pro 5 hubs. I've been extremely happy with that. But like I said, if you're a heavier rider or you intend on riding it hard, those stock rims might not hold up that well for you. The stock hub that came with it is also it's whatever. It's not the worst. It doesn't have good engagement, which, some people are for or against. But with this being a high pivot, with it having not as much pedal kickback, you can get the benefit of the higher engagement hub. The next not so great thing about the bike is going to be the brakes. Again, if you're a beginner, it's fine. If you're a lighter rider, it's totally fine. If you're not pushing that hard, it's totally fine. But if you're buying this bike and intending on racing at a moderate level, you might have some trouble with those brakes. I mean, TRP, they make wonderful brakes, and even their lower level brakes like the Slate Evo, they work really well. They have the thicker rotor. The hose size is pretty much the same. The piston size is pretty much the same. You just get a little bit less power. And if you're relying on your brakes very heavily, if you're used to having those strong brakes where they act like you expect and they stop you like you expect, riding that might be a little scary, I don't know, for lack of a better word. Yeah, so I mean, that's pretty much it in terms of the components. The drivetrain is whatever, it's the stock drivetrain that came with it is not the best. It's a very cheap drivetrain. I went ahead and I upgraded that as well. So I've got the full SRAM GX DH with the Truvative Descendant DH cranks on there, and that's been really nice. On the drivetrain side, one of the negatives is, I'm sure you've seen this online, the train has a tendency to jump off. I've added an E13 chain guide on the bottom. I had no problems with chain drop. That was a really nice addition, and you can pick them up pretty cheap with everything being on sale. On the negatives, a tiny little grievance of mine has been the shock torque specs. You've got 5 Newton meters on the shock mounts at the top, and I think like 7 or 10 on the one on the bottom. If you take the shock off and you put on a new shock or whatever, definitely thread lock those things. Blue thread lock when you put them back in, because 5 Newton meters is nothing. I had to take the shock out and I did not thread lock it going into my race, and those things were just rattling off every run in practice and during my race run. So definitely something to be aware of. The last negative that I noticed about the bike is the internal only routing. I know some people love it. It gets the cables out of the way. That's fantastic. It's kind of a pain in the ass. If you're needing to swap out hoses, if you're needing to do anything with your brakes, it's really annoying. So it goes in through the C-tube and it goes down into the chainstay and it pops out the back. I'm looking at possibly 3D printing some mounts for the bottle cage on there, which is small positive. Like for bike park days, super nice to have a bottle cage. I mean, it doesn't fit a very big bottle. Look at that thing, it's tiny, but it's really nice to have that option. I mean, I don't want to go to the lodge to go get a sip of water. It's nice to throw in a tiny little bottle there. But hopefully I can 3D print some mounts for the cables there and then just route them underneath up through there so I don't have to deal with that internal routing. So that's pretty much it in terms of the negatives. Like I said, I'll keep an update on how I feel about the bike once I get some more laps on it, once I get out to different places, ride different styles of bike park tracks and all of that. Because so far it's just been, tight, slower, desert, rocky, sandy riding. Real quick, just to talk about everything I've changed on the bike. It's the new wheels, the DT Swiss FR 541s. It is the new drivetrain, the new group set, which is the SRAM GX DH drivetrain. The new crank, which is the Truvative Descendant DH. I've swapped out the shock to the RockShox Vivid Coil Ultimate. And the brakes, which are the TRP DHR Evos. These are the regular ones, not the pros. These are on sale. I think should still be on sale. Really great deal because these are by far my favorite brakes. Just stuck with the classic black brake on there. I didn't want to go too blingy on that, especially with the purple wheels and the purple accents on there. But with everything, with the suspension design, with that high pivot, I mean, this thing rips. It's really a bummer to see GT go out on this, and hopefully, in the future they can kind of salvage the company and come back and keep producing bikes like this because this thing is a lot of fun. Now we can jump into whether or not it's worth it for anyone to buy a bike like a GT right now or a Rocky Mountain. I've kind of alluded to this going into the video. So these bikes are on insane sales right now. I picked this thing up for $2,400. I've seen the Pro go for $28,000 to $3,000 on a certain Amazon of biking website. And at that price, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. Like even if the frame doesn't last, even if you have issues with warranty, whatever it is, the components on the bike are enough to pay for the bike itself. You're basically, especially on the Pro, you're buying a fork and a shock and, maybe cranks, and you're getting everything else for free. So if you see these things at extremely low prices like that, like look up the value of the components and you can kind of decide for yourself. And I mean, yeah, that's really what it's going to come down to. It's can you find these things at a decent price? And also, can you find them at local shops? One of the local shops down in Denver, like about 2 hours from where I live, they stock GTs and they had insane deals on them as well. But I mean, if you can find it at a local shop, if you're having troubles with warranty, if you're having trouble contacting the manufacturers, whatever, the shops can help you out. They've developed those relationships with the bike manufacturers. And so it'll be a little bit easier for them to reach out versus you just emailing, yada, yada. I've heard mixed things about GT specifically in terms of warranty and support so far. I've reached out to them before myself, and they've gotten back to me fairly quickly and have answered all my questions and been very extremely helpful. But I've read online other people not having that much luck. One of the things to know is that with companies like GT, Rocky Mountain, the people that work there are going through it. They didn't get a heads up. They didn't think this would happen. So when you're talking to them, like I know you're upset too, but just think like this is their jobs. A lot of them have built, their careers on these companies. And when you call them and you're pissed off, like maybe give them a break, be a little bit nicer, be a little bit more patient. A lot of people are getting laid off, so it might take a little bit longer. Just some things to consider. But all it comes down to is really just finding the right price and, like I said, maybe finding it at a local shop. And at that point, I think it's well worth it, especially if you're not riding these bikes hard. If you're more of a casual rider, go for it, Odds are if you bought another bike, the warranty would expire by the time you broke something, whatever. And I mean, honestly, with the value of mountain bikes right now, the resale value, new bikes right now, sometimes it just makes sense to just buy a new bike a few years down the line, whatever. If things go wrong, like it's the best time to be dealing with this. So the reason I wanted to throw out this review is because I haven't seen very many reviews of the bike online. There's a couple of the bigger reviewers that have done quick takes on it, but I plan on riding the bike quite a bit and updating this review as well once I get a few more days under it. And yeah, if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Just leave something in the comments. Feel free to reach out to me if you want. And yeah.